spreading elsewhere this evening, then clearing tomorrow afternoon. Severe gale nor'westerlies inland. For Fiordland, Otago and Southland, periods of rain, snow to 200 metres tomorrow morning, clearing to fine weather in Otago later in the day. And Chatham Islands, a few showers tonight, turning to rain with heavy falls tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 7.5 past 5.
Kia ora rā, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, 30,000 nurses vote to go on strike. We'll speak to the Nurses Organisation live shortly. But first, we can reveal the government is spending more than $1 million a week on private security guards at MIQ. Now, that's despite announcing 11 months ago it would hire its own security force. But it appears the government is struggling to recruit its own guards, hiring just 48 so far of the 156 it hoped to hire by this month. Katie Todd reports.
In August last year, the government announced it would stop using private security guards at MIQ. But since then, it's splashed $37.6 million on exactly that. Contractors on the front line at MIQ hotels dotted around the country, tasked with keeping COVID out of the community. Figures obtained by RNZ show the number of private security guards at MIQ hotels didn't decrease this year, but went up by about 20%. In January, about 244 private security guards were working at MIQ hotels each day, costing nearly $200,000. In May, that rose to 291, costing just over $150,000 per day. New Zealand Security Association Chief Executive Gary Morrison initially welcomed the move away from private companies, but he feels let down.
There's talk about providing better wages, a big emphasis on providing better training. Yeah, we are very disappointed that that's not the case, that effectively the training is no different to what private security staff have been provided previously as well. So some of the rationale for that change has to be questioned, I believe.
The government first announced plans to hire its own security force after a slip-up, when a guard used Snapchat to post the names, room numbers and arrival and departure dates of 27 returnees. In April, a guard was fired for making unwanted contact with a returnee. Another was caught lying about having been tested for COVID-19 after testing positive and passing the virus on to a colleague. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has cut down the number of security companies it was using from 16 to 1, First Security, and also wanted to fill 156 of its own security roles by July. Despite 634 applications, only 48 people have been employed so far. They're working alongside the Defence Force, AVSEC, and the private security guards. Gary Morrison says most private security guards work about 55 hours per week and get paid the living wage. He says the offer from the ministry was less appealing.
Where MB has come from is that they're offering 1-year fixed-term contracts, so there's no certainty of continuity at the end of that term. They are offering slightly higher wages, but with the hours capped. So effectively, a lot of staff are looking at a pay decrease if they go to work for MB.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins thinks there are other reasons for the shortfall.
But look, there are a variety of things that they're balancing up there. One is just making sure that we've got the right fit, the right kind of workforce there. There's still only a limited number of people available to do that kind of work, but we will be bringing more of those roles in-house.
He's unsure exactly when that will happen.
Look, I haven't got a time frame on that. I'm happy to come back to you on that.
But E2 union organiser Matt Danaher believes it's not necessarily a bad thing to have multiple security companies working in MIQ hotels in the first place.
It probably does make sense to have people from different agencies and different providers who can be brought in at different times to fulfil different roles, and where levels can kind of be increased as required and then reduced slightly as required. And also because it is really intense working in an MIQ, and it does have an impact on your family life in a way that other jobs might not. So being able to sort of cycle people through and then out again at some point is probably a pretty good thing as well.
RNZ also requested the number of security guards working last year when the facilities were under the control of the Ministry of Health, but it refused, saying only security companies themselves would know how many were working.
Reducing hours, taking items off the menu and even closing up shop for a bit. That's what cafes and restaurants say they are resorting to as they grapple with the staffing crisis brought on by a skills shortage. So tonight, restaurants across the country will go dark, flicking off the switch at 7 o'clock for 2 minutes. And says the hospitality sector calls for urgent visa extensions, border exemptions for critical workers and extended working hours for those on student visas. Our reporter Amy Williams and cameraman Nathan McKinnon have the story.
It was lights out at Odette's Eatery at lunchtime today, but just for 2 minutes. The Central Auckland establishment is among thousands of hospitality businesses flicking the switch in solidarity. Operations manager Poi Iruera says they're busier than before the pandemic, but it's harder to find skilled staff.
Today I'm going to be advertising 2. One very senior position and one barista. Yeah.
What kind of level of interest are you expecting?
I put a job ad up recently for a part-time bartender and I got 1 application.
Ms Iruera would like to see government-funded apprenticeships offered in the hospitality sector to address the skills shortage. She says 3 of their staff have returned overseas and they've not had their usual influx of French nationals here on working holidays.
There's a lot of learning on the job here, and often it's been travellers or people on working holiday visas that have brought in the more experienced staff.
The crisis is being felt across the sector. Neighbourhood cafe Crave Cafe in Morningside, Auckland serves between 600 to 800 coffees a day at the weekend. It needs to hire 2 baristas and 2 chefs after they returned home overseas. Without those staff, they are closing early 3 days a week. And General Manager Nigel Cottle says they might have to go further.
Options are we could close the kitchen for a day, a week. We could make our menu much smaller, and one chef could do it for a certain few days. We don't know how to just try and find someone, Just pay lots more money. An unsustainable amount of money is a point.
He says they used to get CVs handed over the counter, but they haven't received any in 4 months.
I wouldn't have thought it would affect us. We're a social enterprise. We're a good employer. We give lots of people opportunities. We employ people, from addiction backgrounds, recently out of jail, with disabilities. So we are a do-good space, and I wouldn't have thought it'd be hard for us to find staff. But if it's hard for us, we know it's hard for everyone. And so, it is a crisis point.
The Restaurant Association estimates an extra 20,000 hospitality workers will be needed over the next 3 years. Its Chief Executive, Marissa Boudoir, says the sector's at crisis point.
This has come off the back of 14 months of reduced trading, and we're in a period now where we've seen some really great growth and trading going on in the sector. But what's holding us back is not being able to find those key people for our businesses.
She says the sector needs immigration rules relaxed for skilled workers, including extending essential skills visas to allow workers to stay.
After some of the conversations I've had today, with many business owners and peers, I do worry. I do worry about the industry, and I worry about the future of some of our businesses.
Opening the border to more skilled hospitality workers can't come soon enough for businesses like Crave Cafe.
I'd love to see the government release some of its 2,000 MIQ spots it's got available right now for some just overseas experienced staff to come in and get jobs. We've even, on other levels, one of our chefs, his wife's been overseas for the last year and a half. She had a baby while she's there, and he hasn't seen his baby yet, and she can't get back in. That kind of thing. Man, I'd be lovely to see just a bit more space open up.
Minister of Immigration Chris Farfoy says the government is aware of the challenges facing the hospitality sector and has regularly reviewed border settings and made adjustments. These include extending about 10,000 working holiday and supplementary seasonal work visas for another 6 months, giving supplementary seasonal employer work scheme visa holders the right to work in any sector including hospitality, and extending the essential skills visas for jobs paid below the median wage from 6 to 12 months. Qualified barista Olivia Cho is among those facing visa conundrums. She's here on a partnership visa and will soon move with her husband to Rotorua. Ms Cho has noticed cafes will take on staff with little experience, a sign they're desperate.
At the first, they are looking for only experienced barista, but nowadays, looking for, we don't need more experience, just making coffee as just have a passionate. That's all. We need really seriously more staff. Yeah, they told us, everybody, same things.
She hopes it won't be too long before the hospitality sector can operate with all its lights on.
Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback on this. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Are restaurant workers critical workers, and should the government allow more of those specialised workers across the border to help these businesses out? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's almost 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rā watu mō te whakarongo mai e haere ake nei, DHB nurses vote to strike again. The Defence Force could be called upon to help cull feral dogs, which are out of control in the far north. Wild dogs have killed more than 100 livestock on a farm near Cape Reinga this week, with farmers now patrolling the property at night with guns. They want the animals dealt with, but the local council and DOC don't seem to have a clear solution to the terrifying problem. The region's mayor says that's where the Defence Force may be able to help. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Anne-Marie Nilsson is running on next to no sleep. She's up most nights at the moment patrolling her Waitaki Landing farm way up north with staff. They're armed with guns and thermal radars, trying to protect their animals from packs of feral dogs. On Sunday night, the dogs got the better of them.
It rained really heavily, and so our thermal stuff wasn't working as well, and they came in on the fringes of the paddock that we had our ewes and lambs in, and we lost the game that night, you know. By morning, we had a whole lot more ewes and lambs to clean up.
That slaughter was just the latest in an ongoing nightmare for the Nilsons. They don't even know how many dogs they're up against.
Last night I actually heard some bailing quite far away, about 3 kilometres on our farm, and I don't think they're associated with the 7 that we saw. So there's a lot of dogs up here. The surrounding blocks just around us, between Christmas and now, we've shot over 30 feral dogs.
But they do know they're terrifying.
At night, you know, when you've got a thermal scope on your gun and not a lot else to see with, when there's 7 dogs coming towards you, it's quite frightening because you're not going to be able to keep track of all of them, and they're aggressive.
The Nilsson farm near Cape Reinga has lost about $30,000 in stock so far, but Anne-Marie says it's the mental toll that's the hardest.
My daughter farms Angora goats. She's 15. She's lost, I think it's 36 of them, and that's pretty harrowing for a young person to deal with. But on top of that, we've lost, I think it's getting up into the 40s now with the ewes, and over 60 head of lambs. And it's a gut-wrenching thing to tidy up after that. Dogs don't kill cleanly.
It's not the first time the dogs have caused problems. Earlier this year, the Department of Conservation shut walking tracks and a campground because they were roaming nearby. DOC's been monitoring its land, which borders the Nilsson farm, since April with trail cameras, and said there had been no more sightings of the dogs. In a statement, it said it was saddened to hear of the livestock deaths, and they should be reported to the Far North District Council, who have the authority to act under the Dog Control Act. But while the council can trap the dogs and have offered traps to the Nilsons, District Services Manager Dean Myberg says it cannot kill them. However, he says the council does want to assist.
It needs to be emphasised, though, that where it's on private land, it becomes a little bit more difficult. On public land and in public spaces where we seize dogs as a matter of routine, you know, wandering dogs that are reported, unregistered dogs, that's our job. We do that as a matter of course. Where it becomes tricky is when it's on farmland, forestry land, and also on dock land. There, it would require a bit of a collaborative approach.
The Far North Mayor, John Carter, says while the council's limited in its powers, there are other options.
One of the things that's been suggested that I'm now going to follow up, given that it's raised its head again, that maybe I'll talk with the Defence Force and see if they might do a practice exercise up north to eliminate the dogs. I don't know whether that's a possibility, but it's worth exploring.
John Carter said he would be putting in calls with the Defence Force to see how viable that idea was.
DHB nurses have voted to strike again. In fact, they'll walk off the job 3 more times. The strikes will be on July 29 for 24 hours, an 8-hour strike on August 19th, and another 24-hour strike on September 9. Just last month, thousands of angry nurses took to streets around the country demanding more pay and a safer place to work. Ko taku manuheria nai nei ko Glenda Alexander from the New Zealand Nurses Organisation. Kia ora, Glenda. Why do they need to walk off the job again?
Oh, kia ora. Well, we're hoping they won't have to walk off the job, and that's totally reliant on us being able to find a solution to this protracted bargaining that we've been engaged in for more than a year. So the strike notices are put in place to kind of, I guess, raise the issue further and signal very clearly that this time our members are absolutely resolute about the need for this situation to be sorted properly, and for the pay to be reflective of their skills and knowledge. So, you know, that's really why they wanted to put in notices for 3 potential more strikes on the hope that this would signal how strongly they feel about the issues.
So it's an insurance policy or a threat?
Oh, look, I think both those things are not an appropriate way of saying what's really going on. What it is saying that we've had an 8-hour strike, we went back into bargaining, we still couldn't find a solution, we're still having challenges around, you know, finding the right formula to make sure that both parties' interests are addressed. Meanwhile, they're back there doing their job every day, struggling in circumstances with short staffing and still feeling undervalued for the work that they do. So what they're saying is we would really like a solution to be found, but if not, then we are going to withdraw our labour again to see what it's like when we're not here.
How many of the 30,000 nurses actually voted in the ballot?
It was a very high level of participation and a high percentage in favour. We don't generally disclose the exact numbers, but it was a very high.
Can you give us a ballpark? What, 80% of that group threw their votes in, or what kind of level?
Yeah, more than 80%.
And what about those voting for the strike? Ballpark, whereabouts as a percentage?
So that's the number of people that voted for the strike.
Okay, so 3 days potentially, depending on how negotiation goes. So how far apart do you think you are? Are you still after the 17% increase in total amount paid in salaries?
So what we're after is a pay increase that will reflect the worth of the work that gets done every single day, and we know that one of the ways of doing that is to have our pay equity claim settled, because that is a process by which the worth of the work is examined and compared with male comparators that do similar work or work that's different but at least have the same level of skills, knowledge, qualifications and so on. So if that happens, that would mean that we've got true value for what the work is, and it would mean that our other issues in bargaining will be more around things like, well, the other big one for us right now is, of course, obviously the safe staffing thing that's going on, and every day is a problem nationally and locally.
Glenda, can you give me some examples here, right? Because people want to be able to understand what you're after. So if we talk about a band 7, there are 7 bands, right? So if we talk about a registered nurse at band 4, so somewhere around the middle, how much do they get now, and how much do you want them to get if you're successful with your negotiations?
Well, what they're getting now is around the 77,000 in terms of their base rate pay. We estimate that if they had a pay equity settlement, that it would be, at the very least what our claim was. So we think that's the issue that needs to be completed. It needs to raise their wages.
So Glenda, just to be clear here, about 77,000 is a base now.
Yep.
Rising to what if you get what you are after?
Well, that would be another percentage on top of that of anything between, at the moment this is the hard thing for us, but between 15 to 20, the different roles have been undervalued to a greater or lesser extent, so it's variable across the pay scales, but we know that there is at least a gap of at least 15 to 20%.
So, again, how far apart are you? So give us a sense. You want one thing, the DHB wants another. I mean, are you just, a couple of steps apart, or are we talking metres apart or kilometres apart? Give us something we can understand here.
Okay, well, I think, throughout the last few months when we've talked to you, media people, about what the offer was that was rejected, which is why we had the initial strike. And that was when the pay offers that were given were around 1.38% on the base, which is not obviously anywhere near what you quoted before in terms of 17%. So what we're saying, and in fact I think now we have got closer because we know now that both parties believe that the pay equity process will actually deliver the kind of pay increases that are required. It's just what happens to get us forward to that point where that claim can be settled and what we can do in the interim. So it's that gap that we'd like to see if we can bridge better than what's been offered at the moment. So any improvement, if you like, to what was offered previously to what would be a very good increase in what we're hoping to achieve and when the pay equity claim is concluded.
So if you do go ahead with the strikes, 3 separate days, right? The DHB said it was going to take them months to catch up from the last strike. Months. So they won't be caught up yet with the surgeries and other delayed procedures. Can you still guarantee the public support when, again, people are going to be knocked off the list or sent away because their procedures can't take place because nurses are on strike? Have you still got the public with you if you go out for 3 days?
Well, I think you just need to remember that the 3 days that are signalled already are over practically 3 months in terms of when they're scheduled to occur. And I think what was demonstrated during the 8-hour strike on the 9th of June was that the public are really behind us. They actually see every day what is going on for those nurses. They're seeing nurses who are in tears, trying to get their work done in unsafe conditions whereby they're rushing around, they're being constantly rushed to do the next process or procedure for their patients. They're not having the time to spend with them and to talk to them about their concerns. So they are fully supportive as far as our feedback is, and I'm sure that they will remain supportive. I think they also want to see us achieve this outcome because it's about their safety as well. It's about having the highest quality of nursing being able to be provided by people who are able to do that because they're attracted to the profession, that they want to be there and that they're being recognised for the value of their work. So I think the public are still well and truly behind me, and I believe they will remain behind us.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is Glenda Alexander from the New Zealand Nurses Organisation. Now, in a statement, DHB say their focus remains on finding a way to settle the collective agreement with the Nurses Organisation. DHB spokesperson Dale Olaf says they spent 2 days with the NZNO and an independent mediator last week discussing options for settling the pay talks. He says while nurses have endorsed a strike proposal, DHBs believe they can come up with an offer to settle the pay talks. He says they're continuing to work on a range of options and will be working with the union again this week to progress the talks before the two sides sit down again next week. Mr Olaf says that DHBs recognise the essential role of nurses, midwives and healthcare assistants in caring for New Zealanders and respect the NZNO members' right to strike. He says they're working towards the best possible outcome and also need to ensure they can maintain essential hospital services if the strike goes ahead. And he says their aim is to settle the collective agreement and prevent the strikes. It is 29 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Prime Minister is standing firm on the political hot potato of superannuation, despite Treasury warning the cost of the ageing population is on an unsustainable track. Politicians have been told for years the costs of superannuation and the likes of healthcare will skyrocket as the baby boomers head for retirement. But Jacinda Ardern has pledged to never raise the age of the entitlement as John Key did before her. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Recognising superannuation as having the potential to become a major political problem for a national government, aspiring Prime Minister John Key made the following promise on keeping the age at 65.
I will resign as Prime Minister and as a member of our Parliament rather than break it.
He was roasted by Labour as taking a position that was wrong, dishonest and even cowardly. But on the election campaign trail in 2017, Jacinda Ardern took the same path.
And you'll resign rather than raise the age of super from 65? You will?
Well, isn't that letting down her generation?
Now Treasury sounding a warning that cost pressures will ramp up sharply as large numbers of New Zealanders head for retirement, and on the current path will lead to an unsustainable level of debt. Jacinda Ardern, though, remains firm on not raising the age.
This is, in my view, something that we need to give people certainty over. So that's why I've said that whilst I'm Prime Minister, we won't be changing the age in which people are eligible for superannuation.
Nationals suspended contributions to the superannuation fund during its tenure. Payments resumed by the Labour coalition government in 2017. Ms Ardern denies her position on not raising the age will unfairly burden future generations.
So long as we continue to contribute, and we are, to New Zealand's savings scheme for the future, then we should be able to give that ongoing certainty to New Zealanders about when they'll be able to retire. And in many ways, I think that does create greater fairness for those future generations too.
National Party leader Judith Collins also defending the approach of the government in which she served, denying it was irresponsible.
No, we were not. I think what is irresponsible is the government continuing to spend money like it is with no thought as to where it comes from.
Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi wants the superannuation age to reflect the reality for Māori.
Māori die 7 to 10 years earlier, and so there needs to be not a unilateral decision around who gets it at a certain age. It should be based on mortality rates, and so if Māori are dying 7 to 10 years earlier, they should be getting the pension 7 to 10 years earlier.
In the final year of the national government, then Prime Minister Bill English laid out a plan to progressively lift the age to 67 by 2040. But in opposition, leader Judith Collins is non-committal.
We've previously said that we would look to actually extend out the age at which people could become eligible, certainly have that conversation about it. This is not something to be announced today because it's something that we have to have a whole plan on, which we're working on. But it is ultimately the government's decision to waste enormous amounts of money and not to actually put the focus on where it needs to be.
Jacinda Ardern says there will be no further changes to the tax system as a means of raising more money. She also says there's no plan to index the rate of super payments to price inflation rather than wages, that Treasury suggests could help keep the cost of retirement under control.
Kia ora e te iwi, haere aki nei I a Checkpoint. A new report labels the health system unacceptably racist and says Pacifica suffer the most. The South Island aquarium that could be forced to kill its animals because they've got no other place to go. And the government could be in the market for pre-loved MIQ facilities. We talked to a top real estate broker about one option. Homai o whakaro, let us know your thoughts on superannuation. Is it time to raise the age of super, and what should it be? Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and there's always the email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We're a little late to the headlines, but they're worth the wait. Ko Susanna anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. Nurses are set to go on strike again 3 times over the next 2 months in protest at stalled pay talks. More than 30,000 New Zealand Nurses Organisation members voted to take industrial action on July the 29th, August the 19th and September the 9th. Glenda Alexander from the New Zealand Nurses Organisation has told Checkpoint that strike notices were issued to show their level of frustration at DHBs. She says that nurses feel undervalued and want their concerns to be taken seriously. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says there are a limited number of people currently available to work as security guards for MIQ hotels. The government has been struggling to recruit its own guards after it ended contracts with 15 security firms. It has spent $37.6 million on private security staff for MIQ hotels in 8 months instead. Chris Hipkins, however, says a reason for the slow recruitment was to ensure people were the right fit for the work. The hospitality sector says it's at crisis point and restaurants will attempt to bring attention to their staffing shortages by turning off lights for 2 minutes at 7 o'clock tonight. The Restaurant Association estimates an extra 20,000 hospitality workers will be needed over the next 3 years. Its Chief Executive Marissa Bidois says there has been significant trading growth in recent months and they need experienced staff. The National Party's Nicola Willis says she supports a new transitional housing facility in central Wellington, but it's not nearly enough to fix homelessness. The building on Tory Street has been developed by the government, council and Wellington City Mission and will accommodate up to 100 individuals and whānau. Residents in central Otago can expect to be without power tonight after strong winds damaged electricity lines earlier today. About 550 customers are without power, with majority in the Ettrick area, about 100 kilometres inland from Dunedin. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Nā mihi mo te rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku manuheria nai anei, ko Nona Peltier, who is in the studio to talk business. OK, let's go straight to the Institute of Economic Research's survey, telling us that business confidence is continuing to improve along with consumer demand. So what numbers are we looking at?
Pretty strong ones. In fact, enough to stoke interest in the New Zealand dollar, which reacted quite strongly. It rose to 70.9 US cents. So last week it was just under 70 cents. That's quite a big hike. And it's because there's expectations now that inflation is going to be so strong that the Reserve Bank will have no choice but to act sooner to raise interest rates. And that's what's stoking the expectations there of a rate hike. In fact, one bank suggested that they may go in November. Another thought, well, February, but maybe even sooner than that. And it's because that the numbers, a net 10% of businesses expected an improvement over this year. And that's against an 8% pessimistic view in the last survey. That's a big turnaround, really, when you think about it. So what's some of the numbers? 69% said they were having trouble finding staff, and that's fueling, of course, wage pressure.
Interesting, because we've done a story earlier in the programme.
Also, these inflation pressures, a net 54% are reporting higher prices, and that they expect to raise their prices in the next 3 months. That's more than half of the people surveyed, businesses surveyed, rather. And yeah, so basically there's a big expectation there that the economy is going to grow about 4% in the year ended June. That's a big increase as well. So there's a lot of expectation of growth and inflation, and that is fueling the interest rate expectations, which of course is supporting our dollar.
OK, what about Westpac New Zealand? Today has it sold its life insurance business. This is to Fidelity Life. So what exactly did they buy?
Well, they bought 150,000 customers and the rights to be referred, like Westpac will refer new customers to Fidelity Life in exchange for the deal. Now, that is a trend we've been seeing across a number of banks. And this is because the Reserve Bank has been looking at raising the, basically the financial solvency rules covering life insurance. And of course, a number of banks have been offering that type of service for years, but not so much now. Most of them have sold out. And so Westpac got a nice, shiny $400 million for their deal. 400.
Wow.
I know. That's a lot for some customers. And
referrals.
And refer.
Okay.
It's a heck of a lot of money.
Okay, speaking of numbers, should we take a blast around the market?
Why not? Okay, also, another thing that drove up the dollar late today was the Reserve Bank of Australia. They're still saying, no, we don't have the growth, obviously, that New Zealand is seeing. So they're not expecting to raise their interest rates until 2024. And that sort of went, oh, okay, well, so as a result, we saw the New Zealand dollar rise to 70.9 US cents, 93.7 Australian. I hasn't seen that high for a while.
Yeah.
And 51 pence. The index, of course, the top 50 index fell a bit, and that you would expect that with interest rate expectations rising. Fell 0.4%. That's a drop of 53 points to 12,759.
Thanks,
That's
Nona.
the business.
That is the business with Nona Peltier. Park-like grounds close to the airport and complete with swimming pool and ample parking. It reads like a prime piece of Auckland real estate, but for the fact the Jet Park Hotel is ground zero for COVID cases. The quarantine hotel people are transferred to if they test positive for the virus. Now the government says it's investigating whether to lease or even buy some of the MIQ facilities because they'll be needed for a while yet. It hasn't specified exactly which ones. But the COVID response minister says hotels outside the CBD with space to exercise are the better pick. Real estate broker Michael Bulgaris knows a bit about sealing a multi-million-dollar property deal. So what about Jet Park? It may or may not be for sale, but could it fit the bill?
Property's all about presentation and first impressions, and this is where if the government were to take control and invest money into the facility, they could start by making it more pleasing for the eye, more attractive, and the first impressions would be so much better just on the approach.
What's your first impression on the approach then, currently?
Oh, just conducive to the area, that's all. But it could be like a beautiful compound hotel in Fiji or Denarau or somewhere. It could be, with all that ground, it could be landscaped and made into something really beautiful. And the website could be more upmarket for overseas people to have a choice to come. And the rooms do seem quite spacious and there's big kitchen facilities. I mean, the layout's there. It's just it was built in a decade where architecture wasn't really all that pleasing.
But Michael, there's been a lot of people shedding and aerosolising in that hotel. How do you kind of, I don't know, how do you turn that into a positive?
Just bubble wrap it and fumigate it, don't you? I think it's fine. I don't know. It's good. Look, a revamp would bring it up absolutely fine. A lot of old hotels strata titled off and sold as individual apartments. So there would be competition if it went onto the market, and particularly with the volume of land and the close proximity.
So, if you had a big money buyer on the line, right, you got 20 seconds to get them interested, what is your pitch for this? Why would you buy it?
The huge industrial and commercial growth in that airport Manukau area is overwhelming, and it has become very popular.
So you're walking around with Chris Hipkins. What are the bits that you point out to him then? You know, in your mind's eye, if you imagine it. You're there at Jet Park. What do you single out and go, hey, Minister, look at that. That's a positive because of X, Y, Z.
Flat land, plenty of room to improve, and probably room to develop further, to utilise the value of the land.
Could you put a price on it?
No, I think a lot of, you'd have to, there's two ways of pricing with commercial. They're looking for a yield on the return and what potentially the network, what the return would be, which I don't think we could really apply. Or you're looking at land over the improvements, the land value plus the improvements. But if the improvements need another 50% of renovation, well, then that's going to be subtracted. I think it's pretty much land value. None of us have a crystal ball to see how it's all going to pan out in the next 2 or 3 years with the COVID, whether it's going to be phased out or it's going to get worse. So I personally think it's a sensible investment.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hey, Muriaki ina pita kōrero after the news at 6. More on the nurses' vote to strike. 3 more times if they need to. Queenstown is bringing together some of the brightest business minds to work out ways to make the town more than just a tourist destination. COVID-19 dealt a devastating blow to the district as 1 in 6 people worked in the tourism industry. Today, the council has unveiled a new campaign aimed to safeguard its economy against future blows. Anei te kai ripoata a Tess Brunton.
When the border slammed shut, the shockwaves were keenly felt in tourist-dependent Queenstown. Nearly 18 months down the track, the council is the driving force behind a campaign to attract business leaders, employers and talent to the district, all with the aim of helping to diversify the economy. Drive Accounting Managing Director Hayley Hobson moved from Sydney 2 years ago when the lifestyle there started to turn the mother of 2 off.
And they were both at daycare and they cost me $170 each a day to go to daycare. And then on top of that, I was working such long hours. I was commuting 3 hours a day just to go less than 20 kilometres. So it was just an absolute nightmare. And expensive, as I said, and I was not getting to see my kids. And we always had a house in Wanaka.
She was concerned she wouldn't find work or things for her 2 kids to do in Queenstown Lakes. But fast forward 2 years, she's got her own business and is launching Drive Marketing with plans to have 10 staff on the books within 18 months.
All my preconceived ideas of what Wanaka didn't have were totally wrong. They can do more than what they could ever do in Sydney, because in Sydney all they would be doing is going to after school care. I'd be commuting, going grayer than I already am. Life would be rubbish.
Her story is one of several showcased on the new Home for Healthier Business website, launched today by the Council's Economic Development Unit. The website offers information and resources to help people move to the district, establish a business and make connections. Hayley Hobson wishes it had been around when she moved.
If I'd seen the website before I even looked at Seek, I would have had that confirmation that there's things to do and all the available resources. It would have given me that foundation level to know that the chances are there, because I honestly didn't look at anything. So if my friend never said, why don't you move here, we probably never would.
Before COVID, High Ground Brands Managing Director Alex Worker expected his family would live in Panama while he'd be marketing food around Asia Pacific. Instead, he faced a lockdown in Panama before moving back to Aotearoa for his sick mum. He reached out to the council to see what opportunities the region offered for food tech, saying it was the positive response that helped to make up their minds.
This is one of the best centres for any returnee expat or Kiwi looking to balance, both the business and the lifestyle. I think we're 7 minutes from an internationally operating airport. Within 2 minutes from that airport, I can drop my kids off at the local schools. And I found a really, really comfortable and warm and inviting co-working space in Mountain Club.
Sharon Fifield works in the Council's Economic Development Unit and says work started on diversifying the economy back in 2015. COVID was a harsh wake-up call.
Everything that we were working on suddenly became quite urgent. We could all see the risk that we faced in having almost all of our economic eggs in the tourism basket, and just how much it would take to reduce that risk over time.
But there's also no plans to put tourism on the back burner.
Diversification, a way that we look at it, is it's a form of economic insurance. So it's really spreading risk. So if we're growing other industries that aren't so reliant on people getting on planes, for example, and travelling globally, then that's going to be good for the district.
She says connecting with people who've made the shift will help others who may be deterred by the cost of housing, size of the economy or the distance from market. The campaign is not aimed to attract the masses. Instead, they'd like to attract 10 to 15 people over 6 months. It won't be a quick shift to encourage different industries to the district, but the council says it could be crucial to help them weather future storms.
Some of your feedback now, and there's a lot of it in response to our earlier story. This is about the restaurants who are turning their lights off tonight for 2 minutes at 7 o'clock because they say they're grappling with staffing crisis brought on by a skills shortage, not being able to bring labour into the country, not being able to find the labour they want here. This person's got in touch to say, I'm an experienced chef, but for my skill level, the pay is low. There's a shortage of people willing to tolerate low wages for hard work on your feet all day. Put prices and wages up. Worth a try, they say. Another listener says, I have kids desperate for jobs. Not one of the hospitality jobs they see advertised will take in anyone inexperienced. No one is willing to train kids on the job to be baristas or servers. They need to help train their own workforce. That is a common theme. Someone else says, I've got no sympathy for the employers. Collectively, they have failed to train local people because they've been able to get away with paying minimum wages to temporary immigrants rather than a living wage. How sad their pigeons have come home to roost. And another in the same vein, no sympathy for this lot. Why don't they train some locals? Too hard, eh? Much easier to import unskilled third world labour. We have a massive housing shortage in this country, which won't be be fixed by importing more unskilled people to do basic work in kitchens and serve food. That one is from Patrick. Thanks for all your feedback. Do keep it coming. 2101 on the text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The British Prime Minister has confirmed he plans to lift all coronavirus restrictions in England later this month. That means an end to limits on social gatherings and mask mandates. It's an approach New Zealand's COVID-19 response minister Chris Hipkins says he would not take. Here's the BBC's Vicky Young.
All around us, the signs of life interrupted by a pandemic. Instructions about where we can go, who we can see, even in our own homes, how far apart we must stand. But in 2 weeks, things could change. COVID hasn't gone, but most restrictions in England are likely to disappear. Restaurants and pubs can operate normally. Theatres and cinemas can fill every seat. Large crowds can meet once more. The Prime Minister putting the emphasis on personal responsibility instead of government orders.
I want to stress from the outset that this pandemic is far from over, and we must reconcile ourselves, sadly, to more deaths from COVID. There's only one reason why we can contemplate going ahead to step 4 in circumstances where we'd normally be locking down further, and that's because of the continuing effectiveness of the vaccine rollout.
And in Bristol, people are starting to contemplate life with fewer rules.
Personally, I think it's better to be safe than sorry, but just like every normal person, I welcome the change.
It's the wrong thing, wrong decision.
Why?
Why? Because the case is going up.
At least give it a go, and then if anything, just get worse, go back to it. You can always go back.
I think we've just got to live with it, and that's that. You can't keep living your life being told what to do. People are now afraid. They're even now afraid to go out, some people.
For some, the face mask has become a hated symbol of intrusive government. It'll still be recommended in hospitals and in closed public spaces, but the legal requirement to wear face coverings will go. Unions say that will put workers at risk. The days of hundreds of pages of rules and regulations to follow will soon be gone. Instead, the government's asking us to use our common sense, make personal decisions about how we stay safe. It's a big shift in approach, but it comes at a time when cases are rising. The Prime Minister's been marking the NHS's birthday, and making sure hospitals can cope has been at the heart of his COVID strategy. Can you tell us how bad you expect it to get?
Obviously, we have to be cautious, and we will continue to look at all the data as we progress. If we don't go ahead now, when the summer fire break is coming up, the school holidays, all the advantages that should give us in fighting the virus, then the question is, when would we go ahead?
A Picton aquarium says it could be forced to kill more than 100 animals if it can't reach an agreement over its lease. Eco World Aquarium and Wildlife Rehabilitation Centre at Picton Wharf is at loggerheads with its landlord, Port Marlborough, which is 100% owned by the council. Eco World says it's been told its 20-year lease won't be renewed, and Director John Ruman believes that means a long list of animals are at grave risk of being put down.
Groper, snapper, stingrays, blue cod, gurnard, pufferfish, warahu, freshwater species, eel, whitebait, the whole range of species that you find in the Marlborough Sounds.
And turtles too, John?
Yeah, the turtles, we do have some turtles. We don't really like holding turtles, apart from the fact that we have 2 red-head sliders, but they're a really noxious pest. But we deliberately hold those for interpretation so people can learn about just what a pest they are.
So what is going to happen with all of these animals?
If we can't get any sense out of the Marlborough District Council and Port Marlborough, a vet, I hope it's not Christine who does all the work with us, saving all the animals, they'll have to be anaesthetised and euthanised with dignity and with full iwi protocol.
And do you feel you're at that point now where these animals will have to be put down?
Well, we've been trying to work with the Marlborough District Council of Port Marlborough for the last 10 weeks. They just won't budge. They just treat us like a boat shed. And they're heartless, blunt, They've even said they'll assign a staff member, a manager, to help us dispose of the animals. I'm going, what the hell?
What about rehoming?
The problem is with marine species is that there are only 2 other aquariums in the country. It's Kelly Carlton's in Auckland and the National Aquarium in Napier. The animals wouldn't survive the transfer. I mean, as I say, a lot of our animals are rehabs. They're not at 100%. They wouldn't handle the journey. Heavens knows how you'd even do it. And the other one is these aquariums are full up. They've got their full allocation. Definitely can't let them go into the ocean. They can't fend for themselves. They don't know how to feed themselves. They don't know how to defend themselves.
John, how are you feeling about this situation? You've obviously put a number of years into this, so...
I'll see if I can hold my composure here. This is not good. Well, I haven't slept. I've had shingles and I've lost 5 kilos. Is that a good indicator?
You're pretty stressed.
You're not kidding.
I mean, how attached to the animals are you?
They're our friends. They're our workmates. I know this sounds, honestly, you may think this is creaky, but we work in association with these animals. They all have their own characteristics. They are tremendous assets for the interpretation work we do, for the advocacy we do, for the health of the ocean. You know, when an animal passes away, it's hard. But God, I mean, I'm at the top of the pyramid here. I'm responsible.
Do you have a favourite, John?
Oh, I think Fi's probably us. He's the stingray. He's such a character. He's been here for 19 years. He's come through thick and thin. He responds to voice. When you step up and you start talking and it's feeding time, he comes to you like a dog.
What do you think is going to happen to that stingray?
We all hope, the fingers crossed, that animal will flourish and enjoy it, will live out its natural days here in a happy state. But as it currently stands, I think there'll be 2 needles to be anaesthetised and then euthanised. And that all has to be done. I think Port Marlborough's now saying it all has to be done by the end of October.
What would you like to happen here, simply?
Very simply, survive, let's keep thriving, and I use the words bouncing forward, and just make it better.
That's John Ruman. Now, to be clear, protected animals like the tuatara will definitely be rehomed. Port Marlborough says some time ago it talked to EcoWorld about a possible extension of the lease. However, it says the aquarium sought different terms that were not acceptable to Port Marlborough. It goes on to say we've made several offers, each with extended timeframes, acknowledging the need to release or rehome wildlife. All of these offers have been rejected. It says we're now trying to help the business vacate its premises and assist with the sustainable rehoming of the aquarium's marine life and other animals. It's time for some of your feedback back now before the 6 o'clock news on the nurses and the strike. This woman says on whether they still retain public support. As one of the public, yes. By this point, the DHBs must by now have an idea arranged for pay parity. So why don't they just meet nurses halfway? Another one says, as a recent patient at the Hutt Hospital, I endorse everything the NZ Nurses Association says. The nurses were running from patient to patient overnight. It is disgraceful that this kind and caring government allowed this situation to continue.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with tēnei. Nurses have voted for 3 more strikes with their union, saying there was a high voting turnout of its 30,000 members working in DHBs. One of those preparing to head to the picket line says there has been mounting frustration over pay and conditions. Nolene Dale, an enrolled nurse at Waitakere Hospital in Auckland, says there is a lot of anger behind the decision to stage 3 separate strikes. She says wards are often understaffed and they deserve better.
We've been asking the DHB, the Ministry of Health, to give us nurses what we rightfully deserve, and not just the nurses, to give the general public of New Zealand what they rightfully deserve.
A 24-hour strike is planned for July the 29th, 8 hours for August the 19th and 24 hours for September the 9th. The government spent $37.6 million on private security staff for MIQ hotels in 8 months, after announcing it would hire its own guards instead. It has ended its contracts with 15 security firms, yet the overall number of private security guards working at the hotels each day has increased. Katie Todd reports.
Figures obtained by RNZ show in January about 244 private security guards were working at MIQ hotels each day, costing $198,000. In May, that rose to 291 guards, costing about $153 per day. Earlier, RNZ reported the government is struggling to recruit its own guards, with just 48 working so far of the 156 it hopes to employ. They're working alongside the Defence Force, the Aviation Security Service and the private security guards.
Fiji has reported a daily record of 636 cases of COVID-19 in the most recent 24-hour period. The Health Ministry also confirmed 6 more deaths due to the Delta variant of the virus, bringing the toll to 39. A skills shortage in the hospitality sector is forcing cafes and restaurants to reduce hours, take items off their menus and close for periods. Restaurants around the country are switching off their lights for 2 minutes at 7 o'clock tonight to bring attention to the staffing crisis. Amy Williams reports.
The industry is calling for urgent visa extensions, border exemptions for critical workers and extended working hours for student visas. A neighbourhood cafe in Auckland, Crave Cafe, is among those caught up in the labour shortage. Its general manager, Nigel Cottle, says they are 2 baristas and 2 chefs down, but still serve up to 800 coffees a day at the weekend. He says the cafe is closing early 3 days a week, but it's only a short-term solution.
As Treasury warns about the burgeoning cost of superannuation, the Māori Party says the retirement age should take into account life expectancy, which is significantly lower for Māori. Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi wants the super age to reflect the reality for Māori.
Māori die 7 to 10 years earlier, and so there needs to be not a unilateral decision around who gets it at a certain age. It should be based on mortality rates, and so if Māori are dying 7 to 10 years earlier, they should be getting the pension 7 to 10 years earlier.
Neither Labour nor National will commit to raising the age, even with the latest advice that the current track will lead to unsustainable levels of debt. The Prime Minister says resuming contributions to the super fund will mean it's affordable for future generations. The Far North Mayor is considering calling on the Defence Force to help cull a pack of feral dogs roaming the area. A family farming near Cape Reinga says they are living a nightmare due to the dogs killing more than 100 of their livestock in the last week. They say they haven't been able to get the help they need from the Department of Conservation and the Far North District Council. The Mayor, John Carter, says everyone wants the problem solved.
One of the things that's been suggested that I'm now going to follow up, given that it's raised its head again, that maybe I'll talk with the Defence Force and see if they might do a practice exercise up north to eliminate the dogs. I don't know whether that's a possibility, but it's worth exploring.
John Carter says he will be putting in calls with the Defence Force to see if it's a viable option. The owner of a Picton Aquarium and Wildlife Rehabilitation Centre fears he will have to put down more than 100 animals as the centre's lease ends. Port Marlborough, New Zealand told Eco World Aquarium and Wildlife Rehabilitation Centre in April its lease wasn't being renewed beyond the end of July. Owner John Ruman says the centre will be forced to close, and while some animals can be transferred, many can't. He says it would be almost impossible to transport the marine life to other aquariums without them suffering or dying, while others will not survive in the wild. Port Marlborough Chief Executive Rhys Wellborn says the port's trying to help rehome the animals. It's 5 minutes past 6. The All Blacks Fijian trio expect to be targeted when they take the field in the 2 upcoming tests against Fiji. Sevu Reece, George Bauer and Hoskin Sotutu are all hoping to play in the first test in Dunedin on Saturday night. Reece, who was on the verge of playing for Fiji before his 2019 All Black call-up, says it will be a dream come true to play against Fiji, having grown up playing with a number of the opposition.
I was joking to George Bauer and Hoskins because those are 2 other Fijians, and I told them, man, if we do get the chance to play Fiji, I was like, we probably will be the running target around there.
It's women's quarter-final day at the Wimbledon Tennis Championships tonight. 3 of the world's top 8 remain, headed by world number 1 Ash Barty. Barty will play fellow Australian Ayla Tomljanovic for a place in the semi-finals.
You know, to play Ash in the quarters, 2 Aussies, you know, one will for sure go to the semis. It's great. So I think everyone back home is really happy, and I'm thrilled to play Ash. I think I'm hoping that it will be a great match.
The remaining men's quarter-finalists will also be found when Russian second seed Daniil Medvedev faces 14th seeded Paul Hubert Hurkacz. Wimbledon will be at capacity following a relaxing of the rules around crowd numbers amid COVID. Netball's premiership final will be held at Spark Arena in Auckland on August the 8th. The leaders at the end of pool play will advance straight to the final, while second and third will play off on August the 1st for the other berth. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples Troy Kingy's foray into folk music. Well, he seems to be able to do everything else. There's also a debut from Wellington band Womb. We've got a Trans-Tasman discussion on e-commerce, easier on the environment. And our philosopher Anne Kerwin has been reading David Livingstone Smith's book on dehumanisation and how to resist it. On Nights, it's a Borg-free zone with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Kapiti Coast, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Isolated showers, rain spreading from the west tonight. Heavy falls tomorrow morning, easing to isolated showers from the afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud, rain developing for a time tomorrow. Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy, periods of rain overnight. Isolated showers developing tomorrow evening. Severe gale northerlies in exposed places. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, rain, sometimes heavy, spreading north this evening. Possible thunderstorms, easing to isolated showers in Buller tomorrow and clearing to fine weather elsewhere. For Canterbury, high cloud, rain with heavy falls near the Divide, spreading elsewhere this evening, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Severe gale norwesterlies inland. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, periods of rain, snow to 200 metres tomorrow morning, clearing to fine weather in Otago later in the day. And Chatham Islands, a few showers tonight, turning to rain with heavy falls tomorrow. RNZ National. It's 8.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government appears to be committed to its elimination strategy when it comes to dealing with COVID in this country, even after most people have had the vaccination. So how feasible is that? Dr. Nikki Turner is the Director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre and joins me now. Kia ora, Dr. Turner.
Kia ora.
How do you open the borders and maintain an elimination strategy?
Yes, well, of course, there's a lot of unknowns, but I think the main plan would be you get as many people in the population vaccinated as much as possible for 2 reasons. One is, of course, personal protection. The vaccine is highly effective. But the other is the more vaccinated people, the less the virus will spread. After that, then you can carefully and slowly try and open the borders. As we start to open the borders, COVID disease will come into New Zealand. There's no way COVID can be internationally eliminated. So the question for New Zealand is, as COVID starts to come across the borders, if we just have a small amount of cases, then we should be able to manage with a well-vaccinated population and track and trace and basically stamp it out. Now, if we get more COVID that overwhelms our ability to stamp it out, then we will end up in a position like many countries in the world where you end up with COVID just running through the community. So those are 2 different scenarios, really.
So when you talk about a well-vaccinated population, what is the number there that we think is well enough?
There is no magic number. So there's no magic number that would stop the virus spreading in parts of the country. And there's several reasons for that. One is we know now these new variants are highly infectious. And the other is you don't tend to have the whole population vaccinated. We can't vaccinate our young children. There are often communities that may have lower vaccination rates than others. So there's not a magic number. You really want just to support as many people as possible.
But how do you know when you've hit that, though, Nikki? So if you say you want to get as many vaccinated as possible, right?
Yeah.
We can survey people and ask them if they're hesitant, if they're going to have it or not, but that's their opinion on the day, right?
Yeah.
So how do you know you've reached your best bet in terms of getting people over the line to get immunised?
Yeah, you don't know. You just keep working away at it like we do with the other national immunisation programs. So you absolutely aim for as many as you can and no equity gaps so that you get vaccinated consistently across the population. It's not going to stop. We're going to vaccinate our population this year as much as we can. There'll still be people we'll be reaching out to going forward.
So
we're not ever going to get 100%, ever.
Right. So how do you know then when it's time to adjust the border settings? Do you set a vaccination target, and when you achieve that, you reward the population by saying we're going to look at the settings on the border?
Yeah, well, my opinion would be you set a vaccination target to offer effectively the vaccination to the whole eligible population. We're expecting that by later this year. Once you've offered it fairly and equitably to everybody you can, we've done a really good crack. New Zealand's done the best it can. We then have to start carefully opening up the borders. You know, we all know you cannot leave the borders shut forever.
That means December then, doesn't it, Nikki? And I'm sorry to interrupt, but people will be hanging off your words here. That means December then, does it? Because if you're saying the target you set is to offer it to every eligible person, the government has told us over and over again that will happen by December. So if everybody is offered it by December, does that then mean we can expect the border settings to shift sometime at the end of the year or the beginning of next?
You know, I'm not setting the government strategy, but what I would suggest...
You're giving them advice though, aren't you?
I would suggest that by the end of this year, we've had the best crack we can at vaccinating our population so that at least early next year... Now, it doesn't happen suddenly. We can look at steps towards carefully opening up our borders. And if we do it carefully and slowly, we can manage some COVID coming in. But if we did it en masse, all at once, I think our services would be overwhelmed immediately.
Okay, there's a number of things there. So that's what you think. Is that the advice you've given the government? Because you're also on one of their advisory committees. So have you relayed that view that once you offer it, they should look at the settings?
My advice goes in with a pile of other people's advice, okay? And this is my personal advice around it, and that is going into the government, and there's other people giving advice as well.
So when you say you don't, wholesale fling open the door, you do it slowly. Give me a bit more detail around slowly. What do you do first? Do you say that all Kiwis who are fully vaccinated can have free passage back and forward over the border, or what do you do?
Yes, I think there's a range of options that you can do, and you would have seen other countries talking about this too. So the range of options are certainly fully vaccinated people are less likely to transmit. So crossing the borders initially, you'd prefer to allow fully vaccinated people to come and go. You may initially want some shorter quarantine periods and some testing as well to ensure that they're still not carrying virus. So there's steps along the way that we can look at testing approaches, shortening quarantine, and really encouraging mostly only fully vaccinated people across the borders, plus children, of course, to minimise the amount of COVID you're likely to see in New Zealand so that then our public health services can cope.
And knowing what you do about the science, when you say potentially shorter MIQ for fully vaccinated people, how short would be realistic?
Well, my end of the story is on the vaccination. I'm not the MIQ expert, but I do understand that you can look at a range of different ways of fully vaccinated, then ensuring people's being tested on arrival. Some countries are suggesting a few days. Some countries go as long as 7 days. But also, it's an evolving situation, so that even if I gave advice now about the best approach to shorter quarantine and vaccination, it's likely to evolve over the next few months. So there's not a single magic recipe to how we do it, but I think the principles are really important, that we do it slowly and carefully, start lifting the borders, recognising that vaccinated people are way less likely to be carrying the virus than non-vaccinated, but that does not mean never.
And you say you are part of this group that's giving advice to the government. Have you given all your advice to the government, and when can we expect to have a little squiz at it?
I think that's a question you need to ask the government. I'm talking to you like I talk to our staff, or when we're training healthcare sector, to think about following through the consequences of what is likely to happen next. So that's
but you haven't been given a date for its release, Nikki?
No.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Dr. Nikki Turner talking to us there about the elimination strategy which COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins says the government will stick to even after the immunisation program is rolled out. Nurses are set to walk off the job 3 more times in as many months over pay and working conditions. Last month, 30,000 healthcare workers, who are mostly nurses, took to the streets in a nationwide 8-hour strike after snubbing a pay offer from district health boards. Now, nurses are set to strike again for 24 hours in late July, followed by an 8-hour strike in August and another 24-hour strike in September. Ane te kai ripoata a Jean Bell.
We've been asking the DHB, the Ministry of Health, to give us nurses what we rightfully deserve, and not just the nurses, to give the general public of New Zealand what they rightfully deserve.
That's Nolene Dayal, an enrolled nurse at Waitakere Hospital in Auckland. She'll be among the 30,000 who will walk off the job 3 times in the next 3 months. Ms Dayal believes past strikes haven't made any difference.
So we are very, very angry, and this time we will work harder to get the government and the DHB to give us what we rightfully deserve.
She says the DHB's last offer would have meant a pay increase of about 1.3% for her wages.
Those people who are on a bit higher salaries, like charge nurses and nurse specialists, they were getting absolutely nothing, no rises at all.
Nolene Dayal says nurses with higher qualifications should have their pay bumped up accordingly, and she'd also like to see wards be better staffed.
We have to go to work and actually perform like 2 people, but being the one person, and it can be physically really demanding.
New Zealand Private Surgical Hospitals Association President Richard Whitney thinks it's important that there are enough people training to be nurses so that the workforce is well padded.
The workload component of the nurses' area of concern will only be resolved by additional staff coming into the sector. The pay element is a separate aspect, but actually work pressures and the stresses associated with working within the health sector is a numbers game.
DHB spokesperson Dale Olive spent 2 days with the union and an independent mediator last week. In a written statement, he says DHBs believe they can come up with an offer to settle the pay talks, despite union members voting to strike. Mr Olive says the DHBs would try to minimise disruption, but some elective surgeries would have to be deferred due to the strikes. Health Minister Andrew Little is satisfied talks between the parties remain constructive.
But I'm acutely aware that the centrepiece really of what's going to fix the problem is what we do on the pay equity question. That's been around for 3 years now, and I've asked officials to accelerate that work.
Union lead advocate David Waite says members are resolute about ongoing action. He says nurses are facing a national health crisis in terms of safe staffing, recruitment and retention, and members can no longer enjoy their working conditions. Mr Waite says discussions with DHBs are ongoing and mediation is scheduled for later this month.
We've just had a media release from the Ministry of Health. They say that this afternoon there are confirmed positive COVID-19 test results for 2 mariners who are currently isolating on a vessel at sea off the coast of Taranaki. The mariners are part of a group of 9 who arrived in Auckland on Monday before they were transferred onto a deep-sea fishing vessel in New Plymouth. They say that the situation is low risk to public health. All 9 of the mariners provided negative COVID tests, pre-departure tests, before travelling to New Zealand. And following these initial negative tests and their arrival in New Zealand, the mariners were tested again at an airport testing site in Auckland prior to their transfer to a vessel in Port Taranaki. Now, the vessel has left New Plymouth as is in international waters off the coast of Taranaki. All 9 mariners are still on board and isolating. The Ministry of Health says it's now going over the flight and airport movements of these 2 people as part of the contact tracing process. And it says at this point, public health staff have identified 3 contacts who are currently isolating, including 2 people who work at the port and the driver who transported the mariners from Auckland to New Plymouth. Now, health authorities in Taranaki and Auckland will be following up, and all 3 will receive their routine tests while in isolation. So that's positive COVID-19 test results for 2 mariners who are currently isolating on board a vessel which is in international waters off the coast of Taranaki. It is almost 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. People who might otherwise be left out in the cold now have a warm, safe and dry place to stay with the opening of Wellington's largest transitional housing facility. The Central City building has been developed in partnership between government, local council and the City Mission and will accommodate up to 100 individuals and whānau. Our reporter Charlotte Cook and cameraman Dom Thomas were at the opening.
The Central City building, covered in zebra stripes on Tory Street, was once a backpackers. It was then going to be a boutique hotel, but it's now 83 self-contained rooms and common areas for those who need a temporary place to live. The community, those who funded it, those who will run it and those who will use it, gathered in the cold Wellington wind to celebrate the new place some will call home. The City Missioner, Murray Edridge, says he's delighted to be able to create this space, which will give people the best they can give.
We know that people's lives will be changed in this building. We know that people will be given opportunities they perhaps haven't had before. We know that people will be treated with dignity and respect in this space. And I want to acknowledge the staff of the City Mission, Maria Millen in particular, Henare and Serena Parker, and for all the staff who are doing the most amazing mahi in this space. And we know over the next 6 years we are going to fundamentally change some lives, and what a privilege that is.
He says it's not a permanent home, but it's somewhere that's safe and warm, where people can get the help they need to make the next steps in their lives. Manuhiri, or guests, have already started moving in to rooms just like this. This is one room of 83 in the Central City for people who need transitional housing. Zane Budabai is one of those people. He's been staying in his new whare for almost a week. He says having a place to call home for now means a great deal to him. Almost all rooms have a bathroom, a kitchenette, television, wardrobe, table and couch. Some also have a washing machine.
Just absolutely amazed by what we've been provided here. Us and the other people staying here. Really grateful, really grateful for the support here. Just even if you wanted to talk over something, you can talk with the staff. If you need help with budgeting or work or any kind of social service, the Wellington City Mission are happy to help. They've been really supportive.
Zane, along with the help of staff, is creating a plan to get a job in something he likes, maybe truck driving or admin. National Party MP Nicola Willis has spoken out about the housing shortage before, and while she supports this type of facility, she says it's not enough.
I do want to acknowledge that we still have hundreds of Wellingtonians living in temporary emergency accommodation that is often unsupported, insecure and unstable. There are hundreds more living in that situation than there were 3 or 4 years ago, and across the country we have more than 4,000 children being raised in motel rooms. So this is a drop in the ocean.
Someone else with concerns started off with the nickname Angry Neighbour. Jaffa Beach has now changed his tune after understanding exactly how the facility will work.
My concern was about the outside piece, what I perceived as outside of their purview. You know, they have somebody downstairs, but if your tenants move outside and then they attract thieves and stuff like that, and the drug dealers and that, there's a lot of them around, what are you going to do, and how do they prevent them impacting their clients? How do they help us walking past feeling safe and stuff like that? So yeah, and they just responded to everything, one after the other. It was really good.
The Housing Minister, Megan Woods, was on the grand tour around the building and says she's impressed by how beautiful the rooms are. She says this is a place where lives can be changed.
There are already some people in here that are making their lives here, and that is absolutely critical. But looking forward to seeing more people in here and us continuing to roll out more spaces. We can't get marooned because you think it's too hard.
Megan Woods says unfortunately in Wellington there is more than enough demand to keep it at capacity, something the Missioner is prepared for.
We're actively working to place people into permanent housing from the moment they join us. So this isn't a place you come in and just stop. This is a place you come and keep moving. And in fact, we help you make those most fundamental changes in your life so that actually you can go on to be successful wherever you go and whatever you do.
The building is leased from property developer Alex Castles for the next 6 years and is being underwritten by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development.
The healthcare system's been labelled unacceptably racist, with Pacifica suffering the worst health inequalities, according to a new report. RNZ Pacific's Marina Whangaiawa Muller reports.
In Fijian, Bola Sautu is an expression of good health that has lived to its full potential, a life of abundance. It's the name of this report, showing anything but good health. Pacifica are 12 times more likely to be diagnosed with a mental illness than other populations. Pacifica experience higher cases and deaths of breast, lung and uterine cancers, but the lowest rates of screening. 63% of Pacifica 5-year-olds have tooth decay, compared to 31% of non-Māori non-Pacifica. And more than half of pregnant Pacifica women are left without midwives, compared to just 19% of non-Māori non-Pacifica. The Bola Sautu report shows some of the worst inequities in New Zealand's healthcare system, calling it a systemic failure of human rights and a national shame.
It obviously isn't working because of the fact that DHBs are really struggling in maternity services because of the medicalisation of birth is skyrocketing, and the cost to our women and our whānau is really costly as well.
Tish Taihia is a New Zealand-born Samoan midwife of 22 years and manager of Ngā Hau Mangere Birthing Centre. She says expectant Pacifica mums don't know how to find a lead maternity carer outside of hospital defaults, and they aren't provided with culturally competent midwives.
If they're low risk and they can have a midwife as their LMC and care for them and birth their baby and go through the whole gamut of postnatal care, then it's up to them to they have to actually go and find the midwife themselves. And sometimes that's daunting.
Health Quality and Safety Commission board member Colin Tukuitonga says the figures aren't good enough, but he doesn't want Bola Sautu to be just another report rehearsing numbers.
Certainly another report that doesn't lead to any action is not what is needed. The district health boards and the primary care providers, not Pacific, but everyone is held to account for making those changes. I just think it's unacceptable and unfair.
Amid government reform, which will merge the country's district health boards into a singular entity, Mr Tukuitonga says the groundwork has been laid out to transform Pacifica Health. Otherwise, there'll be a continued decline.
We will have pregnant Pacific women not being able to access midwives in the numbers that are comparable to other parts of our community. We have children continuing to miss out on vision and hearing testing well child checks. We'll have Pacific people with diabetes continuing to have blindness and amputations and kidney failure.
Pacifica doctors make up just 2% of the entire health workforce. Bola Sautu co-author Api Talemaitonga says universities and polytechnics must encourage more Pacifica students to fill the gap.
Medicine or healthcare is being practiced as the one-size-fits-all. You go to your doctor, you're told your blood test results, you're given a prescription and out you go, without any emphasis on the quality. Does the person sit in front of me really understand what it means?
The report lays out that the system is racist and systemically biased. Mr Talemaitonga says it's a call to action.
I feel for our people. We go along, we see the doctors, we get the medications, yet we're still not getting the same level of benefits as the rest of New Zealand.
Despite several national policy statements and strategies, nothing's dramatically improved the health and well-being of Pacifica. It's hoped that Bola Sautu will be the desperately needed stake in the ground.
We're almost out of time. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō. On First Up from 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, a celebrity chef calls for the government to be kind to the hospitality industry and relax visa restrictions to curb their staffing crisis. Kei te hoki mai anō Pōpō whānau po Mārie.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. 2 mariners who were in Auckland yesterday have tested positive for COVID-19 and are isolating on a boat off the coast of Taranaki. The Ministry of Health regards the public health risk as low and has identified 3 contacts who are currently isolated.